Now, in continuing to think about the fundamental experience that we receive as part of our basic training, what I'd like to mention next is one of the most difficult and troublesome of the emotions that we are taught, which is shame. Now, the most important thing, in my opinion, to understand about shame is that it is an abiding feeling of wrongness. That this that I feel, this that I'm thinking about, that I'm alluding to, whatever I'm doing is wrong. Now, that can be inflicted by essentially superficial experiences. In other words, if I'm taking down the jam jar from the shelf in the refrigerator and it's going to spoil my dinner, as they say, I can simply, don't touch the jam, you're going to be having dinner in half an hour. Now, that's a relatively minor incident, but it nonetheless tells me that I'm doing something wrong in that moment. And that simple experience done once is not going to inflict a deep feeling of shame. But if that's repeated 3 or 4 times every time I reach for the jam, then I'll have a slightly deeper experience of wrongness. It's wrong for me to take down that jar from the shelf in the refrigerator. Maybe I'll do it, but I'm doing something sneaky. I got to be careful because it's wrong. And it is in this way, on these relatively minor experiences. The word minor isn't right here. It's like low level, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. In other words, gee, you're not tying your shoes right. Or, gee whiz, you didn't take the right turn on your way to school. Or, gee, you're not, the way you're coloring that tiger in your coloring book isn't right. Those kinds of messages are all what I call first level instances of doing something wrong. And it depends on how much of that a child receives that measures the degree with which shame is inflicted. So that at very least, a child may come out of basic training with the idea that this, that, or the other thing is wrong. Uh, you know, Aunt Griselda limps. Don't talk about the way Aunt Griselda limps. That's not nice. Oh, well, don't do something that's not nice. You see what I'm saying here? Now, there's a kind of way of making that wrongness more persistent. I do this with my clients. I'll say, the kind of messages that we often get, don't you know better than that? At your age, are you still? What if the kids in your school knew that you were? What if the people in your class understood that you? Those kinds of things. Very often I'll say those to clients, and the response I'll get is very instructive. One of them said to me a little while ago, "What'd you do? Interview my mother?" You say, or another will say, "Yeah, well, it sounds like you talked to my father." And exactly, because those kinds of often well-meaning instructions arrive at that kind of negative implication. You're doing the wrong thing. Now, there's an even more subtle way of doing that, and that's where the complexity and richness of us as humans can really be reflected on, because sometimes parents are very well-meaning and try to show the best way to do things. And perversely enough, counterintuitively, things may be so good that I'll never be that good, or I can never get to be that good, as is being indicated to me. So the very opposite way of going about this, here's the good thing, here's the right thing to do, may, in a contradictory way, be taken in as, oh, I'll never do that right. I can never aspire to that. I'll do it wrong, you see. In one way or another, that way, that feeling of doing it wrong can be experienced, can be felt as a characteristic of basic training. When a sufficient amount of that is inflicted, when that is repeated over and over, and when it's a kind of an abiding atmosphere, a tone that is inflicted repeatedly on you, and you have the repetition of that, the feeling graduates from being connected to individual things like whether you tie your shoes right or whether or not you're eating jams 20 minutes before supper, that kind of thing. It becomes a more generalized feeling. It's often referred to as chronic shame with a capital C and a capital S. But it means that it becomes the abiding feeling about myself that I contain in myself unconsciously without even having to allude to it, without having it connected specifically to any one activity. In this sense, when it graduates to that level, it becomes a sense of wrongness that is simply me. It's the way I am. Anything I say or do is wrong. So if I want something, it's wrong. If I don't want something, it's wrong. If I speak, it's wrong. If I don't speak, it's wrong. And that kind of feeling, in my experience at any rate, goes into a kind of substratum, a kind of sub-level of awareness. My way of making a metaphor for it, it's kind of like the dirty water that's in a sponge. You can just look at a sponge and it looks like a perfectly normal sponge unless you squeeze it. Then you see the brackish water that's in that sponge. And that's in a way how chronic shame is. It's as though it were in my atoms, as though it was in my whole being. And I just know that I'm wrong to do something. Now that can cripple. In other words, I may, as I get older, decide that I'd like to become a movie director or a composer or a prosperous businessman or whatever, rich. But that will be wrong because I wish for it, because I aspire to it. Whatever it is, don't complete that. Don't do that because I'm a wrongness, you see. And so, in a radical sense, that feeling of wrongness, which is generally not at all rare, comes down to a simple no. Whatever it is, no, don't, you see. And you can go through life wondering, what the devil is obstructing me? Why can I get this done? Why don't I succeed? Why can't I bring this that I desire about, you see? But it would be wrong for me to do that. Now, what that does is it sets up a paradox, it sets up a dilemma in psychological work that is common, very widely spread, and too often not recognized. Because once that feeling of wrongness becomes the right feeling for me, then it sets up a kind of internal contradiction. The way I say it to characterize it is, I become my own worst enemy. In other words, I will contrive to lead a life that deprives me of whatever it is I aspire to. Let's say I'd like to become a rich businessman. Don't succeed at that, whatever you do. And when I do that deprivation, when I treat myself with that kind of loss, with that kind of lack in my life, then I'm obeying the rules. Then I'm doing what the shaming rules have told me, and I'm doing exactly the right, wrong thing for me. I am depriving myself as I should. On the other hand, if I then take a hold of myself and work like the devil to become a prosperous, or whatever it is I want, then I'm disobeying the rules and I'm being bad and I'm not obeying the laws and rules which I've been taught. So either I lose that which I aspired to, in which case I am good because I obey the rules, or I go for what I aspire to and have, in which case I'm bad, wrong, and should be ashamed of myself. Now, classically, that is the kind of thing in classical therapy, you see, that would be diagnosed as a quote-unquote resistance. And now you're bad all over again because you're doing the wrong thing, you see, and there's that condemnation, in which case you should feel shamed all over again. And there's no way out of that, all right? But I think you can see what kind of a dilemma that kind of sets up for myself. You see, in the realm of the feelings that I have been taught, I am set up with a contradiction. I shouldn't do the wrong thing. I shouldn't do something which makes me ashamed of myself, like being a successful movie director, like being a rich businessman, like being a great artist, or whatever, you see. If I do those things, then I should be bad, and God knows I'm being illegal and outrageous. And so the importance of understanding what the message is that we receive in basic training is revealed by this self-defeating dilemma that it often imposes. And we wonder, why do I obstruct myself? Why do I bring about the catastrophes that I do? Why do I live in the kind of fear of loss that I do? See? And it's difficult to see that I'm often obeying the profoundest lessons I receive. I'm being a very good boy. I'm being a very good girl to deprive myself of what I most aspire to. Well, how do I escape from that? You see, without bearing once again the burden of condemnation, the deep feeling of being wrong for doing what's right for me. You see, and that kind of contradiction, that I am my own worst enemy, I am the most astute lawyer that argues against me, you see, is, I think, fundamental to a great deal of the experience of the psychological work that becomes challenging. Why do I have a problem? You see, why do I look for these kinds of questions in the first place? Well, I'm fighting with something here. But what the devil is it? How do I get out of a jail to which I possess the key?